said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Be water, my friend.
This is really an honor to have one of the major, I'd say, forefront thinkers in the field of flow hacking and flow genome hacking on this show, and I'm super excited about this episode. And I'd love to go into a little more detail about what the flow state actually entails. Not only, this is not an episode on Flow 101.
Okay.
We had that. So, but first, for our audience, which is mostly European-based, I wanted to know, what is your response to someone who asks you, what is it actually that you do to just get that started? Because I know
I wonder every time when I get that question at cocktail parties. I always think, well, I don't know, what the hell is it that I do? But I would say, in a nutshell, it's researching the science and the training behind optimal human performance. So that's kind of the sort of boilerplate description. The more personal description is, I am interested in transcendence. I'm interested in those moments where everything clicks, our critic shuts off, and life is joyful and effortless and inspired. And I've really just kind of spent my life trying to track that down. How do we level up to become what's in us to be? And my experience has been that guilt and vanity and relentless forward improvement, the kind of Tony Robbins neck of the woods, just never landed for me. I never resonated. I always thought it was rather kind of aggressive and oftentimes kind of forced. But what did land for me was music, dancing with friends, climbing mountains, surfing in the ocean, experiences that were so clearly bigger and more joyful than me or than us, that it just forces you to come back to your life with a new perspective. So really my entire career has been, how do you take peak states and turn them into abiding stages of growth and development? Because that to me felt like the rocket fuel, and everything else felt like a slug.
Wow, yeah. Actually, I heard you say in your video on the Flow Genome Project website that it saved your life. And you kind of touched that right now a little bit. But was there a particular incident where you said that, like Stephen, for example, who had Lyme disease, right? And it sort of got him over the hump and showed him what life's actually worth. And was there an experience like that for you as well?
Yeah, and it's funny that you asked that, because literally Steve and I were on the phone yesterday morning planning the introduction for our new book, which is called Stealing Fire, which is not just about flow states, but it's about ecstatic and mystical states, psychedelic states, all just really any experience that takes you outside of yourself, outside of your normal waking awareness. And we were asking exactly that same question. Like, Stephen, you got this kind of cut and dried Lyme disease. Here was my rock bottom, the classic kind of redemption narrative. And we were just sort of trying to explore, well, what's the relevant piece of my life that matches that? And in some respects, I would say my relationship to flow states and to ecstasis, which is really, we're sort of trying to reclaim a term here, because obviously ecstasy is so loaded with sort of club drug references and that kind of thing. But ecstasis being the old Greek, meaning literally to step outside oneself. So all experiences that lead us outside ourselves, that's been a huge part. It's really kind of been my central driver, both professionally but also personally. How the hell do I get outside of what has felt like a prison house? For your European audience, my mother was South African, my father was English. I then moved to the States and was never allowed. We were not an assimilationist family, right? So it wasn't like learn to speak like an American and this is the USA. We were anthropologists in a strange land the whole time. So my experience of feeling at home, feeling like I belonged, was always a very tough one for me to crack. And so those early experiences of stepping outside myself, stepping into something bigger, was essential. To kind of buffer against just feeling like, what's the point, and where do I fit? Because all of this just feels like plastic land. So I would say that in my kind of, that old Beatles tune, I used to be an angry young man hiding my head in the sand, right? I mean, I was definitely an angry young man. I was just pissed off that nothing seemed to be as real, true, and good as I had hoped. So in that respect, I think I was kind of like a platonic idealist, like somewhere there was perfection and I was hell-bent on going to find it. And that's why the mountains, that's why the oceans, that's why those kinds of places outside of civilization really felt much more meaningful to me. I mean, Esse's book, like, he's famous for that, for Siddhartha, but Steppenwolf was another one of his books, right? And he talks about being the wolf of the steppes. Like, I'm not fit for civilization and I'm not quite totally wild. I resonated with that book even more than with Siddhartha. Right? It was that sense of I'm betwixt and between. So for me, pursuing those early states by whatever means necessary had a little bit of a I wouldn't say self-destructive tendency, but definitely a willingness to risk it all tendency. And so those moments of feeling full, feeling connected, that gave me a reason to keep going. But the flip side of it is that when you build your life around those states, they are a cruel master. And I think John Lilly, the research scientist who invented sensory deprivation tanks and all those kind of things, he said cosmic love does not care whether you enjoy it or prefer its lessons or not. It's utterly indifferent. And so in those moments, everyone says, oh, I want to experience flow. Oh, I want to experience ecstasis. Like, well, be careful what you wish for. Because in those moments you step outside yourself, there's a huge relief. You're like, woohoo, wow, I'm outside of that monkey suit. But then you're sort of on your knees in the face of the vastness of it all. And that is, that's no picnic either. Right. So I would say that, that it does two things. Right, it leaves you feeling whole, true, and good, and that there's a reason for persisting forward. And it leaves you utterly dwarfed at your insignificance and humbled by your imperfections. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Like, I wouldn't trade it for some other cycle. But I would say it lifts you up to the highest heights, and it utterly annihilates you. And if you're not up for that, it's kind of like big wave surfing, right? I mean, people look at someone surfing Jaws and they say there's this 50-foot or 100-foot wave behind them. They say, that looks awesome, riding giants, right? Thumbs up. But then the hold downs are a bitch, and you've got 3 set waves coming in on you and you haven't had air in a few minutes, and it's both.
Yeah, and you talk about this process of creative destruction, I would say, and I live in Berlin here, and a lot of my friends here are artists, and they're also very, I'd say, in scenes, and they're drawn to also, I'd say, hallucinogens and drugs and whatever, to get them to that brink of almost the self-destruction in order to find this moment of creative creation. So where they're artists and they go to the extreme in order to create art. Yeah. And I think this is very similar in artists and in athletes. And I guess there's this one point, though, where it could end badly for that one person. It's a very tight rope sometimes that you walk.
Yeah, Stephen was just in Squaw Valley for the last month, kind of doing a sort of writing retreat and end of the ski season. And, there were a number of well-known, famous Red Bull athletes and other folks there that their friends had kind of come up to, friends and fellow adventurers with Shane McConkey, who had, Stephen wrote about him, Rise of Superman, who ended up dying, trying to do kind of double ski base jumping. And then some of his friends who have continued to go, other friends, almost like addicts, saying, hey, can you come and talk to him? He needs to back off. And he doesn't, and he's not, we don't know if he's going to, we don't know if he will. And I'm imagining that what you're describing with your friends, artists, and clearly I just read a study last month, and I think it said something, it was an absurd amount, but it was something like 40% of all Nobel laureates had suffered from some form of bipolar or depression. You think, good Lord, so the idea of like the tortured artist is not without truth as far as just how folks are wired that are drawn towards really expressing and bleeding for their creativity. But you start mixing in things like psychedelics, you start mixing in any of these, or life and death adventure sports. They're very much the same thing as far as these states of consciousness they get you to. And one of the analogies that I find really helpful is sort of freehold breath diving, right? And so if you're a freehold breath diver, you're plumbing the depths.
Can you explain that really quickly? What that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's basically how deep can you dive underwater while holding your breath, no scuba tanks. So it's just you and a pair of fins and masks, and people go to extreme heights or depths, and it's fundamentally, I mean, it's the most embodied, high consequence form of meditation on the planet that I'm aware of, and it literally is for all the marbles. And the trick is, of course, you can only go, like, the ocean is relatively speaking infinite, and you can only go as deep as you can come back. Right? So if you chicken out, if you come back too soon, you're like, oh shit, man, I left something unexplored. I could have gone further. But if you go too far and you don't make it back to air and sunlight, it's game over. And that is, I think, the same with plumbing the depths of the infinite. So when we talk about flow states or ecstasis in general, we talk about it having four qualities. It gives you that selflessness, the loss of your inner critic and conscious waking self, which is what most people orient around. It gives you a sense of timelessness, meaning it drives you away from the past or the future and into the immediate now. And that's Eckhart Tolle, and that's all that kind of, a lot of kind of New Age spirituality talks about being in the now, but this, absolutely puts you there. There's an effortlessness. There's this neurochemistry boost. It all feels wonderful. You're in your zone. You've just leveled up, and if things you used to struggle with suddenly all click. There are these great breakthrough experiences. That's really fun too. But arguably the real point is the richness. The fact of you find yourself having access to a layer of information that appears vast and limitless, and your ability, and again, there's the neurochemistry behind it, and you've got rid of your prefrontal cortical conscious processing, you've accessed a lot of subconscious processing, you have pattern recognition, focus typing, neurochemicals in your bloodstream like norepinephrine and dopamine enhancing anytime you connect a dot, you've got anandamide in your system potentially, and that's allowing lateral recognition. You've got all these good things happening, but the net result is metaphorically, you're camping out in the cosmic browser, and you can punch in anything you want, and you can find information, and that is deeply seductive. It's deeply seductive, and there can be a sense of, well, that's the most amazing thing ever. I have to go back. I have to go back as soon as possible. And so, back to the freehold breath diving metaphor, which is, it is infinite. It is infinite. So the question is not, can I get to the end of it? You can't. The question is how far can I go and bring back that which is of value and of service in my life in the here and now without overshooting the halfway point? If I overshoot the halfway point, I come back with none of it, and it's game over for me too.
Yeah, just jumping on this point, because I read this really interesting article about the comedian Robin Williams, who took his own life, a couple of years ago. And the theory was that he was so much in the forever box when he was in stage, which is the term for being in the zone, for an athlete. I'm a former basketball player. And he was just joke after joke after joke, when he was on stage and getting this feedback, this immediate feedback from the audience and feeling the energy. And when he got off stage, though, he had this depressive struggle recovery phase that kind of pushed him towards also apparently drugs. But I'm just citing this author right now.
Sure.
And later on, he was trying to get this feeling back of being in the forever box. And that's why he might not have wanted to kill himself. He just wanted maybe to get to the brink of dying in order to feel alive again.
Yeah, and you can make the same case for Michael Jackson, for a lot of deeply talented artists, where the moments on stage, or the moment whatever the tumbler, the combination lock that they would get to that place, they would sacrifice almost anything else. And so, yeah, pursuing ecstasis. And I said this to my college roommate. He's like, dude, you really seem to live a pretty amazing life. I'm like, yeah, I do. It's awesome, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Because you really need it's T.S. Eliot said, he said, costing not less than everything. And it's not like that we always joke about this. This has taken us some thinking. It's like, how do we position our organization, and how do we position our training, and all those kinds of things. And in some respects, it starts out we're reaching out to people where they actually are, which is like, hey, I'm me, and I'd like more flow, please. Cool. Well, you can sign up for Flow 101, and off you go. And it's sort of my current waking identity getting to add some bells and whistles. But there is a point, there's an inflection point in here where you're like, oh, this is actually starting to disassemble myself and reassemble an entirely different way of relating to my biographical history, my present reality, where I get information from, how I integrate and process that, and it becomes a very esoteric technique. I mean, it's fundamentally guerrilla tantra for the 21st century.
I love that term.
And that's, you mentioned, a kind of psychedelic artist scene in Berlin. There's clearly kind of Burning Man culture, big in North America and certainly spreading
here as
around.
well.
Yeah. And so you're like, okay, so now what we've got is throw in the biohackers, throw in the kind of sex positive, name your contemporary movement, but sort of sexuality, psychedelics, electronic music, adventure sports, biohacking and censoring and consciousness hacking. And you've got this kind of collection of cross-pollinated sub-communities, subcultures. And it's basically a self-initiating DIY culture of, untapped transcendence. Now the question is does anybody have the operating manual? Because we're all getting together and throwing what amounts to kind of the party at the end of time, right? I mean, it's literally, and again, throwing a Function One sound system, whether it's Boom Festival in Portugal, right, or Burning Man, or
right.
These things, and the techniques of ecstasy that we are combining at this point have never been accessible to more than a handful of elites and elects in tightly cloistered, highly controlled, closely guarded situations through human history. And now we've scoured the globe, we've dumped them all out, we've turned them up to 11, and we've said, let's light them all on fire at the same time and see what happens. And what happens is more people are blowing themselves sky high than ever before. And in fact, a colleague of ours at Oxford just published this week studies on Burning Man. It was something, well over half, maybe even up to 80% of the people reporting transformative experiences, realigning their sense of selves, realigning their connection with others, persistent over 6 weeks, very comparable to the Johns Hopkins studies on psilocybin, end-of-life research, all these kind of things. So you're like, okay, this is interesting. We really are, it's a DIY self-initiating mystery cult. At scale, distributed around the world. And the question is what is it for and what do we do with it? Because it starts out, again, personal improvement. I'd like to have more of those things. I don't want to be so stressed, and I'd like to kick ass and get a promotion and maybe a new girlfriend or boyfriend. And then it comes into, whoa, we are actually engineering a sort of, for lack of a better word, sort of a stargate to our own future selves. And that's a lot. That's a lot because, is it okay to use colorful language on your podcast?
Of course.
Okay, great.
Free.
So, in a simple sense, like ecstasis to me, like the way it comes out most straightforwardly is the sort of the bliss fuck crucifixion, right? Where you get offered the absolute white light, ecstatic joy and completeness. And hot on the heels of that are you prepared to literally die for this, to die to this moment? Because every ecstatic practice is in some shape or form a death practice, right? It is a dying to my preference. It's a dying to my identity. It's a dying to my story. It's a dying to my pain. It's a dying to my goals, my aspirations. It's all stripped away to the right, to right now. And the challenge with that, the hedonistic piece of this, because it's really fucking fun, right? Let's face it, like we are throwing better bashes than anybody ever has. And if you think even back to like Woodstock and the hippies, what were they doing? They were like hooking down random amounts of LSD blotter and smoking like dirty Mexi brick weed. And like that was as good as it got. And they had like, let's have free love, but it wasn't necessarily empowered. It wasn't deliberate. They were basically kind of just children playing with the first round of all this. If you really start saying what's going on now, the degree of sophistication in consciousness hacking is off the charts. And so the question is why are we throwing this party at the end of time? Is there any obligation or responsibility that arises from it? Because, and in fact, again, this just showed up in our research, but there's something, there's all these online psychedelic experience forums like Arrowhead and some of these others. There's one called the Hyperspace Lexicon, which is all about tryptamine use, so dimethyltryptamine, the active ingredient in ayahuasca. And so they've come up with their own dictionary. And it's literally like they're crowdsourcing a dictionary of transcendent states and experiences. And in our book, we describe, isn't this interesting? Because if Joseph Smith, right, the guy who started Mormonism, right, Joseph Smith famously in like 1820 something found these basically a golden binder, that was written by an angel, and this told the whole story of Mormonism. And then everyone was like, okay, cool, sounds like a really interesting story. Where are the golden tablets? And he's like, oops, lost them. And Moses too. Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, and he's so pissed that they're that the Hebrews are worshiping the golden calf. He slams them to the ground. And like that was the only evidence. They were supposedly written by the finger of God, right? And that was the only evidence of direct divine to human translation. And they all go away conveniently, right? And today we have thousands of people crowdsourcing transcendence, right? Crowdsourcing epiphany. And that goes from one to many, meaning I had this hair on fire experience and you just all got to take my word for it, to tens of thousands of people going, yeah, that sounds familiar. Or, you're way out there on the edge of a curve and there's this cluster. But one of the terms they came up with, and so the interesting thing is you get an agnostic Gnosticism. You get we have just drank from the fire. We have just had nectar from Olympus and don't know what it means. Because just by the law of large numbers, we realize every single one of us that goes to the wishing well comes back with a slightly different story. So it softens the certainty. There's that whole, what is it? It's not Yeats again, is it? Maybe it is Yeats. Yeah, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with a passionate intensity. And you think, how many fundamentalist nut jobs are there in the world of every stripe that if they were just able to have a deeply ecstatic experience would be humbled in their certainty? Right.
Let me jump in there real quick because I recently, and I'm just going to share that openly, but there's a shamanic healing community here in Berlin, and I had my first ayahuasca ceremony here with a shaman, and I was very scared of it because I thought it might bring up some emotional distress, and I read up on it a lot. It's flooding your emotional memory system, sort of your limbic system, I think, right? So that you feel really sensitive to your emotions and everything. And for me, it was the interesting thing is that I felt like I was connecting with all the other people in the room, and I knew what other people were doing. At least this was happening in my mind, and I was communicating on another scale. And I was like what you said. That's just what triggered that memory in me, because this transcendent moment where you feel above everything else, where you feel as present as you probably could ever feel. And I felt that was sort of a flow state in a way too.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly that's what we're doing with the building of our Flow Dojo. And really our whole purpose is to say, hey, individual moments or breakthroughs into these ecstasis experiences are wonderful. But what's really potentially powerful and game-changing, something that maybe humans haven't done at scale yet, is how do we wake up collectively and then connect in serial, like a bunch of computers connecting in serial. What happens to our integrated processing power and ability to experience information and translate that into inspiration and application. And so the ability to do that together, and an interesting anecdote. So back in the 50s, when Western anthropologists were first coming across ayahuasca in the Amazon, and telepathine was one of the potential original names, specifically because of the that subjective quality.
Oh, really?
So the notion of it connects me with the other people I'm around, and we have some form of nonverbal information exchange is a known subset of that experience. But just to kind of go back to your original question was, hey, was there a turning point for me? What's my experience been, experiencing flow? And then we kind of unwrapped the deeper idea of there's an upside and there's a downside. And then, hey, we're also creating this really big global culture of self-initiating transcendence right now. And it's outside any established religions or orthodoxies or governing gates. And then we went into the crowdsourcing of the agnostic Gnosticism, meaning we're all going there. We're all having these experiences, but the more of us go there, the less we presume to know with certainty. One of the vocabulary words they came up with was the notion of a hyperslap. And a hyperslap was when people basically try and sort of force the lock to get through the garden gate. And whether it's because, and this is just people's reporting of these experiences in dimethyltryptamine or DMT experiences, it's a little fickle. And sometimes people will blast through to a very non-ordinary experience in what they call hyperspace, and other times it just won't open for you. And so a hyperslap is where someone just gets there anyway. And so whether they're deserving or worthy, they just keep smoking, keep doing whatever they're doing to blast through regardless. And then they have an experience of being basically stuck in the corner with a dunce cap on. The idea is like, I haven't done my work since the last time I came. and I get hyperslapped. I get a full-on beatdown. And it's deeply humbling, potentially very painful or traumatic, but there is no skipping steps. So to go back to that notion of the bliss fuck crucifixion,
I love that term.
It really does feel like those are flip sides of the same exact experience, and you can't skip steps. And of course, here we are at the party end of time. It is incredibly hedonistic. I mean, that's, certainly that by rumor and reputation, but also by straight up reality. I mean, Burning Man is one of the most erotically charged spaces I've ever seen. And yet it's not just sort of carnal sexuality. It's just life force. It's truly eros at its core. Most people sexualize it. Most people loop it through those things, but who the hell isn't going to want to keep coming back to that? And Berlin has that wild ass late night into early morning dancing, right? I mean, what
you would like it here, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so one of my mentors, he always said, just be aware, angels and moths are both drawn to the light. And so when you come to a scene that is pumping out oodles of ecstatic energy, and back in the day it was Grateful Dead shows, and then fast forward to Burning Man, fast forward to the club scene in Ibiza or wherever else, and you're like, you come to these places hoping that it's just sweetness and light, and it never is. And that can leave people disillusioned and even bitter. But the practical reality is angels and moths are both drawn to the light. So what do we do once we're actually throwing these parties with some degree of regularity and precision? And is there an ethic? Is there an obligation of like, holy shit, we are really experiencing more than most humans have ever been blessed to witness in ourselves, in our minds, in our hearts, together, in community, you name it. Is there something other than just a selfie and a social media post about the awesome rager last night?
Right, yeah.
Are we getting access to this for any deeper reason or obligation?
And I think that there's this great danger, and I noticed that actually at that ayahuasca ceremony, and they had this dungeon in Berlin. It was really, really cool. They did it very well, I think, and everyone dressed in white, and they had a bunch of people that took care of us, and this shamanic lady, I think she was from Peru, and and they were all like going around and really spreading positive energy. And my feeling was that they do that because they know about this destructive power that it could end up to, talking about angels and moths. And there were a lot of demons in the room later on. And I noticed that when I was lying there and, you take the ayahuasca and all of a sudden you start to hear in the beginning, before it really hit me, other people started crying, others were screaming, throwing up. So you felt some demons coming into the room, sort of. And then there were others spreading this positive energy to try to drive those out. And that's why I thought then at the end, I said, it makes complete sense to dress in white, to go around, to hug people, talk to everyone, play this rainforest music in order to really be careful with that, because it could easily turn. Right?
Yeah, and it can turn in so many ways, right? In fact, we're literally writing the final section of our book right now, and the final chapter is going to be how not to put this thing in the ditch. Because it's the fastest route to waking up, and it's got the lowest success rate. And, and one of them is, it's not about you, it's not about now, and don't give in to astonishment. Because the not about you, if people step out of their waking self, typically speaking, they step into some other more expansive location, whether it's kind of dissolved into the world, nature mysticism, cosmic union, or even, what might be called a kind of higher self. Like, oh, wow, I have access to like an archetypal expression of me, not just my workaday self. And of course, if anybody's got any psychological dings or wounds that they're looking to kind of pave over, people can want to cling to that. People can want to hang on to that and then insist that they're special or different when they come back. The number of people that have an ayahuasca experience and start a fucking podcast, right? I mean, those kind of things, right? You're just like, shut the fuck up. In fact, and so those kind of, and clearly, I mean, Europe has a long history, right? And in fact, America is catching up fast as far as demagogues, right? And people seizing the pulpit and mobilizing large numbers of folks based on that conviction. So that's what I am most sort of cautiously optimistic about, is this agnostic Gnosticism, the idea of it's an open source instruction manual, it's an open source system for saying, hey guys, no one is going to tell you what it means. Conduct your own experiments, get your own results, make your own meaning. Let's all move forward and live our lives to the fullest. So it can't be, we all need to march in this direction. It has to be stand up and march towards your own fullest expression. I mean, to me, that's the best we can hope for. It's messier, it's slower, and it has less sort of galvanizing certainty to it. But I feel like if you go much beyond it, you're already priming the next,
Jamie,
next overshoot.
How much do you think? How is intention in this whole scene? That's where I have a problem with, because also biohacking. I think a lot of people that call themselves biohackers here also in the scene, they're pretty much just druggy kids that want to be smart. And
druggy kids that want to be smart and maybe have a tendency to like hook up things with electrodes and see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah. So and then with the burners, or some people that go onto these ayahuasca trips and hallucinogens and so on. I think sometimes they're just partiers that want to get to the next level. And what I'm missing there sometimes talking to them is the intention of really trying to, and that's where you come in, because in your webinar, you talked about this human condition. And I think this philosophical aspect is central and elementary to your project. And what happens though when people don't have the right intention going into this?
The wheels come off. You end up with addictions and distractions and manias. I mean, there's a reason, right? There's a reason that all of these techniques, I mean, fundamentally, this is left-hand path stuff. So, Orthodox religions taught the right-hand path, which is thou shalt and thou shalt nots. Stay on the highway, don't go into the ditch. And the left-hand path, what we're sort of referring to as tantric paths, and Aleister Crowley and some of those others in the Western dawn. There's a Western tradition to this, not just Eastern Asian, but fundamentally Rabelaisian, and do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, right? So let me embrace all of it. Let's do sex, drugs, rock and roll. I mean, the hippies kind of revived all that. In the classics, it was wine, women, and song, right? I mean, those ideas are saying don't ban those because they're volatile. Embrace them because they're powerful. Those are, without an ethic, they are tragic, guaranteed. And so my hope is that we can be crafting self-authenticating techniques of ecstasy, where if you don't show up with your hat in hand, if you don't show up with an open heart and bowed head, having done your homework, you don't get through. Now, the trouble is that we also have access to some of the most powerful techniques possible that kind of catapult you up there willy-nilly. And so you take Burning Man, and you've got, arguably the most powerful collective ritual in the Western Hemisphere ever. I mean, Kumbh Mela in India is obviously bigger and, tons of juju. But I mean, as far as like something that's going on today, I think you could make a credible anthropological case that it's a top contender for sure. And at the same time, and it's evolving all this amazing art, architecture, music, visual arts, all these things, even fashion. But then at the same time, you're like, son of a bitch, here we are. And the next thing you know, you've got a bunch of beautiful people dressed in leather and feathers creating this scene. And you're like, how did we create an ego-based scene while the ink is still dripping from heaven? You're like, how the fuck did that happen? Like, we've all just been ripped out of our conscious waking selves. We've all just, been reborn with the rising sun by the temple in the desert. And in the very next thing, you've got, supermodels from New York shaking off an extended Molly jag, or kind of all K'd out on ketamine, and kind of like, shaking their asses on a big sound vehicle. And you're like, how does this happen? How does the cream, how to get a skin on it that fast? So, and so to your point about the ethic of how do we keep this clean, pure, straight shooting? The shortest answer is, I don't know. And I'm continually frustrated, saddened, and disappointed by how quickly it seems to get bent and co-opted back into egoic inflation.
Right.
Like, this is just the newest, blinkiest, shiniest thing to hang on my Christmas tree. Check me out. And at the same time, there's a part of me that knows I shouldn't be naive. I shouldn't be disappointed. I should, like shame on me for even engaging that kind of romantic idealism. But my hope would be, I think maybe it's just my own experience. It's like, I have tons of places I am still oblivious, clueless, clumsy, stupid, you name it. But I would say that my encounters with whatever you'd like to call it, the numinous, those I find very, very hard to co-opt. Those feel like self-authenticating homework assignments, and I just wouldn't know how to turn that into an ego trip.
Yeah, I think this is actually the biggest challenge, because there's just so much addictive potential, and it's so attractive. And when I first met you at that biohacking conference in Los Angeles, and I saw your playground, which was largely missing, by the way, last year, and I hope you're coming back next year. It was just so much fun. And then when I listened to your webinar, though, then it became clear to me that this philosophical aspect is a huge part. And I really liked, I'm not sure if I understood that right, but in my head, I told me that story after listening into it, that you spoke about this problem that we created a world that we don't like anymore. So there are just too many stimuli influencing us every day, and we are looking towards Eastern cultures in order to bring us down, and we're looking towards practices such as biohacking in order to develop new skills to deal with all of this that the environment is throwing at us. Mm-hmm. And so actually, with your project, the Flow Genome Project is set out to, it's not the purpose maybe of identifying what's happening when you're the most present and when you're the most powerful, but actually how do you get into a state of living where you find meaning? Is that true? Is that like almost a philosophical project that is more than just biology?
I mean, yes. To me, that's a nice to have. I just lost your order.
Yeah, I think I lost you also for a second here.
So to me, and I mean, this is just us, we're fully having a freewheeling conversation. Actually, I don't care about that at all. I think that there's Band-Aids and there's mindfulness-based stress reduction, and there's tons of fucking books on how to be 10% happier and everything else. That's not my jam. What I'm interested in is providing people the tools to wake themselves up and level up into next generation, warriors for good. And that is 1 in 10 of the people we speak with. And if we do our jobs telling a good story and citing collective evidence and really being thorough, we might persuade 3 or 4 to give it a try. And 5 out of 10 aren't going to have a clue what we're talking about. And that's okay. Because the real work is providing means by which we can wake ourselves up to what needs to be done. And what needs to be done, I don't presume to know a fragment of it, but I do have a strong sense of urgency and possibility. And if that to me is the point, this gets completely suppositional. Like, we do our level damnedest to remain content neutral, meaning so we pop up in an information layer. Clearly, we're conducting our own experiments, and there's tons of interesting information we're experiencing. And we do our level damnedest not to go spouting off half-cocked to everybody else about this is what it's going to mean for you. But that said, it does feel like the reason for the party at the end of time is that it literally is such an ass-shakingly funky, ecstatic, combinatory therapy that there is a moment, not everybody gets there, but a lot of people do, where you literally dance yourself out of time and space. And you look around and everybody, and it truly happens at Boom, it definitely happens at Burning Man, come sunrise sets, you name it, right? And people find themselves outside of time. And they notice who else is there with them. And there's that sense of deep community, deep brotherhood, sisterhood, and belonging, and a reaffirmation of, oh, I remember what I forgot. I remember what I forgot. I remember why I'm here. And the problem with that party is it is so ass-shakingly funky, and the beats never stop, right? That you will get carried away by that party train again in a second, and you'll have these moments of clarity. Oh shit, I remember why we did this. I remember why we conducted this experiment. I remember what it was supposed to get. And it gave us this glimpse, this ability to step through into something more. And to remember that in the height of the ecstatic release takes discipline or grace or luck. And I think, to your point, I think a lot of people zombie around the outskirts of that, sensing that there's something deeply beautiful and profound there, but they don't necessarily do their inner work. They haven't engaged in their own practices to purify the vessel. And so what they get is mixed messages, garbled contact has.
You talk a lot about, or you mentioned several times now, the party at the end of time. What does that exactly refer to? Is that a term just describing this experience, let's say, at being at Burning Man and dancing all night long and getting into this ecstasy moment? Or is that specifically some framework that you're referring to here?
Well, yes to both of those interpretations, right? I mean, I certainly, if when I say it, I certainly think of the combination of transformational festival culture, widespread, pretty darn focused use of psychedelics, sexuality, music, visionary art, and bundled all together in a variety of different combinations. And certainly a place like Boomfest, a place that could be there. I mean, it'd be potentially maybe a little less sanctified and a little more hedonistic, but and kind of has balances of those things. But yeah, I mean, you put together, you don't even need to put them all together. They're powerful enough. If you put 2 or 3 of those categories together, you are going to blow yourself sky high. And so, yeah, I mean, I use it kind of euphemistically to describe all of these ecstatic technologies and where they end up, as well as, some of the actual physical locations in time and space where they're going down fairly frequently.
What's the longest time that you have witnessed anyone being that sky high, being in the flow?
Without it being a schizophrenic break or a megalomaniacal, right? My sense is that obviously, in fact, Osho, the somewhat controversial guru, he had a good saying. He said, there's nothing more remarkable than being utterly ordinary, right? The ordinary man is the rarest of all. And so I think that you do tend to move in the same way that there's an exoteric, meaning of regular folks' access to flow states and hacking flow. And then there becomes esoteric, meaning, wow, I'm actually completely uploading new software for my self-identity. There is also a time where you go from my center of gravity is my normal waking state of consciousness, and I occasionally crack the code on a flow state, to I actually spend most of my time in a flow stage. This is just kind of what this is my new center of gravity, and I only spend the occasional moments knocked out of it. And when I get knocked out of it, the key is I don't go back to my old biographical storytelling. I actually am just like, oh, I'm off the wave right now. Where's the next swell? Let me paddle towards it. And that's what's in my mind. That's where my intention and functionality are. So I'm just spending my time connecting or linking swells of flow versus me suffering and chattering around in my monkey mind, trying to get a moment of temporary relief. So all that said, Dean Potter, who was the climber and wingsuit fly, who was a friend of ours on our board and died last year, he shared a story of being down in Patagonia, and he spent, I think, something like 3 days nonstop. It was basically, he just did this spontaneous linking of peaks, and it was literally no fall, no going backwards. Like, he just tried to scale these things, and he wasn't sure if they went, and if they didn't go, he was going to peel off them and die. And he linked it. And he spent, I think, 36 hours, something like that. And what he described as just a deep zone experience. That's probably one of the high watermarks last fall when we were actually up at Google's main campus, sort of in the couple of months, sort of September, October time. I was so busy and there was so much intensive stuff happening. And that was an almost laughably long flow state where literally, it was everything from, traffic lights changing at once to getting to a certain place, with 1 minute to spare, to everything. Just, time and time and time again, just feeling like walking a high wire with no net. And the interesting thing is that I also crashed deeply come November because I'd been riding that. And it wasn't like mania. It wasn't like, woohoo. It was just total focus and high consequence. But when I was done, I was done. And I had drained reserves that I didn't know I was dipping into. And beyond that, who the fuck knows, right? You get people who sit in Kauai and live in bamboo huts and play the "we're awakened guru" card very strongly. Mm-hmm. And that's the identity and the culture. Whether or not they're also, Abraham Lincoln had a great quip. He said, "I care not a whit for a man's religion unless his dog is the better for it." Right? So show me your finances, show me your family dynamics, show me how you deal with authority and rules and regulations, show me how, show me all of it, not just the Nag Champa incense, and the namaste. So to that point, I'm not sure. It does seem like the people who take the claim loudest are rarely the people who are, in the most integrated and ordinary sense of it, fully switched on.
By the way, have you tried Dave Asprey's promoted 40 Years of Zen at that point?
No, I haven't. Now, is that his packaging of the 1 week alpha brain training?
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Now, does he have a new device, or is he simply encouraging people to go and do?
No, I think he encourages people to do it. It's this 1 week training program where you're.
Yeah, we actually presented with that fellow. He's like this crazy little Santa's shoemaker's elf. He's got such a glint in his eye, and he's a really endearing fellow. My sense is we actually have colleagues who are coming out of Stanford right now, PhDs there, that are doing, basically that technology, the 40 years of Zen technology, hasn't been upgraded much to speak of since the 70s and 80s. And these guys are coming out with, a 21st century higher tech adaptation and intervention. So there is some much newer stuff on that that is coming out. But again, back to all of biohacking, right? Biohacking, our critique of biohacking is Chogyam Trungpa, who was a Tibetan Lama who came to the West and was a sort of fairly influential spiritual teacher, coined the term spiritual materialism, right? The idea of don't get so wrapped up in your practice that the very thing that's supposed to get rid of your ego just gives you a bigger one. Mm. And we're talking about that with Burning Man, right? The leather and feather scene, right? Aren't we so awesome and transformational? And the same thing, I think, is very much in play with the biohacking community, which is, okay, crossfitting, tough mudding, biohacking, bulletproof coffee guzzling dude, you're massively amped. Now what? And instead of thinking about the next hack or cheat or way to shortcut life, start living it. And and what are you going to do now that you're superhuman? What bullets are you going to step in front of now you're bulletproof? Those questions remain.
Right.
Right. And quite often people skip that and just go back to geeking out on the next supplement they can hook down.
And that's why I created, you might be seeing, but this is the name of my brand. And the idea behind it was because I was very much, my first company that I started was called BioTracker, and we were creating a website to allow people to analyze blood work. So we had these tests, sent home tests, kind of like Insight Tracker, Wellness Effects, maybe you're aware of them. And then...
Theranos, problem.
Yeah, right, Theranos, but that's a very innovative, more
sophisticated.
They patented their whole process. This is all this is behind that already. I think it's larger. But anyways, and we iterated then to make it more of like a biohacking brand pretty much. And then I listened to Stephen Kotler's talk, and I met you guys at the conference, and I was still brainstorming the name. And I was so sick and tired of the word upgrading, optimizing. Like, optimizing what for? You know, as an athlete, I was an NCAA basketball player at Boston University, and I knew when I went to the gym or when I trained, I wanted to win games, win championships, make the starting five, whatever. I had goals. But people here seem to just try to optimize with no particular goal, just to be better. And that's why I said, let's get away from that upgrading. And when I listened to your talk, then I said, we should flow grade people. You should make them flow grade. So to be able to enter the flow state more often. And that's how the brand came about. Just a little backstory.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly, the further we run from the basics, the sooner we get dumped back there. So even including saying, hey, this is this giant DIY movement and everybody's, self-initiating themselves into all these, crazy states and experiences. You're like, yeah, but what about the ethic? And do people have the right intention? And are they doing that? So then you realize, maybe open sourcing everything isn't such a good idea. Maybe all those old stodgy religions kind of knew a thing or two when they had a right-hand path and just said, hey, most people can't handle the truth. So let's give them the straight, simple things of how not to screw things up. And there's only a handful of people that are actually ready, and you've got to kind of earn your way into those states. I wouldn't be surprised if the pendulum, in fact, I would be virtually certain the pendulum needs to swing back in that direction a good bit. And it's the same with the fundamental questions of Western and Eastern philosophy. Why are we here? Where did we come from? Where are we going? And if we're not chipping away at workable answers to those, I think it's a lot of window dressing.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's why I like the scene so much and so much. And I just listened to this Tim Ferriss episode with Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you listened to it. Oh. It's one of the best podcast episodes I've ever listened to. If you listen to one, listen to that one. Naval, he's the founder of AngelList, and he's also very philosophical, and he talks about stopping desire, and he calls desire making a contract with yourself to be unhappy until you reach a goal. And this is the definition for him for desire. And he says, how do you stop this desire? And I think being present, and for him also being mindful, being present is sort of the goal. And I think that's where the flow comes in. Being in flow means to be as present as you will ever be. Opa. And
yes, and right. So I think that's part of the problem with the hippie generation, the New Age generation as well, which was false, like collapsing an impossible to solve polarity, which is how do we be in this world and not of it at the same time? Because it's relatively easy to just dissociate. You can go and meditate for a decade. You can do piles of mind-bending drugs. You can do whatever you want to dissociate and get out of this world. But the question is I still have bills to pay. I'm a householder. I have relationships to uphold. I have a career. I have some mark I want to make on the world, community life, relationships, etc. So, I'm not off that hook. So going cross-eyed and fuzzy is not all of it. In fact, it's really not even half of it. And so the question is how do I dynamically steer between those two guardrails, being deeply in this world and not of it? And in fact, I think I probably shared this on that webinar, but Nisargadatta, the Indian philosopher, right, has one of the best distillations of that I've ever come across, which he says, love tells me I'm everything. Wisdom tells me I'm nothing. And between these two banks flows the river of my life.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Right? And so ecstasis, that's the love tells me I'm everything. Woohoo! That's the bliss fuck. Right? Wisdom tells me I'm nothing. That's the crucifixion. And between these two banks flows flow. Like, no pun intended there, but like literally flow is not simply non-dual happy place. Flow is meditation and action. And you're constantly steering between those two truths, those two realities.
Wow. Jamie, switching gears a little bit, I think this was already so much, and I wanted to hit a couple more topics, but I think we saved most of them for hopefully another episode at some point. But maybe a couple more rapid-fire questions before we wrap it up. And I would be really interested in how do you prepare to get into flow on, let's say, a nutritional basis? Like, what's your diet? Are you bulletproof?
No, but not too far off it. I mean, I would say just spent years trying to figure out, just fundamentally not adopting some lockstep plan. But I would say eat a lot of avocados, a lot of nuts, a lot of water. Try to stick with, again, high quality organic and grass fed foods, animal proteins, etc. And fundamentally steer and manage between those. So yeah, fuel is super important. Movement is another key part, and for anybody, that's to me is one of the biggest game changers. Is just what we eat. Do the Michael Pollan thing. Eat real food. Mostly plants, not too much. Move more. Sleep longer. Be more grateful. And those are some really straightforward basics. And again, to counteract the geeked out specificity of the biohacker culture, is just stick with those things. You're not off the hook. Pay attention, make informed decisions, and it's a sample size of one.
Right.
So,
Stephen mentioned to me that he was very fond of studying the effect of beet juice on flow. I'm not sure if he advanced on that. I just think of that right now. Is there any such thing as flow food?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and most of them are Schedule 1 or 2 substances or require a doctor's prescription. I mean, but no, but if you really want to say, said another way, because right, I mean, food is medicine, medicine is food, right?
Exactly.
So it's just that shift us. If you want to say, hey, how can I either internally myself or externally via supplementation or diet tweak dopamine levels, norepinephrine levels, anandamide, serotonin, oxytocin levels? Are there ways to intervene with those things deliberately to produce effects? Hell yes. Right? And nitric oxide, which is a neurotransmitter in people's brain that flushes, that signals across the blood-brain barrier, does all kinds of fancy and fun things. Nitric oxide, funnily enough, Viagra is a strong mechanism to increase nitric oxide. So if you want to, like, beet juice is a way to dietarily do it. And at the London Olympics, they literally call it like the Olympics of purple poo, because so many, especially endurance athletes, were just bunging it down in huge quantities because it was legal.
Okay.
And so they were able to do it. So playing with nitric oxide concentrations in your bloodstream is certainly worthy of investigation, and it has proven impacts on VO2 max, perceived exertion. It's also big in the bodybuilding community and those kind of things for like pump, those kind of things. But like nitric oxide is not a good one. It's not a bad one at all. Anandamide, so cannabinoids. If you're in Colorado or Washington here or in Amsterdam, there certainly the ability to ingest cannabinoids that gives you anandamide. Runner's high also creates anandamide in the body. It used to be thought it was endorphins, and now they've kind of revised that a bit. Nitrous oxide. Funnily enough, which is one molecular band off nitric oxide, boosts norepinephrine and dopamine with some potential follow-ons of endorphins, and also puts you in 3 to 5 minutes of delta wave brain activity. And that was what William James got started on way back when. But of course, back to your point of abuse, there's so many times that if it works, people go way overboard and they forget what they came for. So there are lots of different ways, conscious and deliberate sexuality and fundamentally like hacking consciousness via sexuality is another very rich, vein and tradition. So there are lots of ways to get there, and to get there pretty skillfully these days. Once we always say, like, you just got to stop hunting your white whale, or more to the point, go find him. Like, if the question is there something more, and can I taste it in this lifetime? The answer is hell yes, in spades. And you need to go scratch that itch until you're done scratching it.
Cool. That's going to be your quote, I think, on the top. And fuck, hell yes.
Hell yes. Hell yes. Not even a question. You can blow yourself sky high. The question is, what do we do afterwards with that information?
By the way, you spoke a lot about sexuality and a little bit about love right now at the end. And I wonder, is being in love also being in the flow state in a way? What does it actually mean? Is it chemically the same thing?
Well, I think it depends on which version or expression of love you're
let's say the romantic the romantic
Sure,
affection.
but even like so early honeymoon stage, love tends to have. I mean, you know, we are sort of dumb monkeys at the same time we're clever monkeys, right? So a lot of the neurochemical arc of relationship is designed, you know, arguably by sort of evolution, and evolution is amoral. It doesn't really care whether we live together happily ever after. It just cares whether genes make it into the gene pool. So the initial bonding, the giddy honeymoon highs, all those kind of things, there's a ton of norepinephrine, there's a ton of dopamine, there's all those kinds of things. There's a lot of reward chemicals. Those taper after 2.5 to 3 years. You then end up in what a lot of people will experience as a flat line, where you're no longer getting those, but you're getting maybe a bit more oxytocin and kind of bonding and trust, and you're getting some serotonin and kind of well-being and serenity. A lot of times that's dissatisfying, and so it's kind of like asymmetrical chemical warfare, where I'm always looking over my shoulder at the next hot opportunity, right? Because that's what evolution has encoded us to do versus stability. It wears off after 2.5 to 3 years, because that's about how long it takes to successfully rear and wean an infant. You know, all of those kind of things. So to say, does love have, is it the same as or share the same signatures as flow, might be too literal a question. Asked another way, I mean, certainly there are arcs in the roller coaster of the cycle of pair bonding that have certain strong overlaps with flow states. And the other question, almost to reverse it, is can you get to flow more readily in a loving relationship? And I think the answer is yes, because a dedicated, compassionate, highly trustworthy practice partner is one of the ways, and it's very, mountaineers in general, right? The idea is they've got someone that they can trust on the end of a rope. They've got someone they can hang out on the side of a mountain with. They've got someone who can carry them home if something goes wrong. So the ability to travel together in this domain is really essential, because otherwise the whole "it's not about me" has no counterweight. But if you're doing it in partnership, and it can be a romantic partnership, it can be a close friendship, but the idea of always buddy up, because someone's got to be able to call you bullshit, someone's got to notice if you're veering off track, and someone's got to be able to hit the eject button if needed. Those parts, I think, are really a beautiful part of the relationship between love and flow states, for sure.
Yeah, actually, I just came across a sleep study that showed that you get better and deeper sleep when there is breathing in the room by another, it could be an animal or a human being. And it suggests that evolutionary, we're just primed to have people next to us while we're sleeping. Makes us feel more protected. So absolutely. I think it makes total sense. Maybe one thing, because you're such a cerebral thinker, I think, this is also from the Tim Ferriss Show question, but if you could put up a sign anywhere in the city, let's say in Austin. Are you in Austin right now? Yeah. What would it say?
Meaning like a billboard, like that kind of a thing?
Exactly.
What are you pretending not to know?
Okay, I got to think about that. Good. That's a good one. All right. Jamie, I think this was a fantastic episode. I'm really, really hyped about that. And we get to cut it with passion. And now to wrap it up, maybe if you wanted our listeners to remember one thing that other than that question you just mentioned, but what would that be if you could give them one advice that they will remember forever?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the meaning of life, ultimate truth, is absolutely accessible and attainable, and there are exactly no skipping steps. Do your work.
Amazing. Let's just leave it at that. That's amazing. Awesome. Okay, maybe a little bit more about you. If people want to find out more about you and do your program now, and I think everyone listening to this now is really excited to check out the Flow Genome Project website, which we'll have in the show notes as well. But where can people find you other than there?
Sure. Well, certainly flowgenomeproject.com, and there's an online training. It's all app-based with integration to wearables for all you biohackers and everything else, but it's a 6-week self-paced program. That's the step one, because after that, you then have access to come and join us in live trainings and those kind of much more fun hands-on events. We will be in Europe this summer, so at the Tyringham Institute. It's a beautiful country manor estate about an hour outside of London. So Tyringham is Tyringham, and they are hosting us. They hosted a really fantastic conference on entheogens last autumn, and we're going to be doing a week-long flow training there in the first week of August. So for the European folks, that's our first time out to do a European experience, and we're really excited about it. We'd love to see anybody who's ready for a hop across the pond on that one. And then certainly the digital component is another great way to plug in. And we'll also be at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California in the second week of August. So those are two of our probably most accessible and fun ones coming up.
Oh, wow. Sounds really, really interesting. Thank you. We'll put that in the notes. For now, thank you for being on the show, and have a wonderful day over there in Austin.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye.